Over the months of August and September, Hot Topics will be following a series called Can Christians. In this series, Hot Topics will once again invite guests to hear from them on a range of somewhat taboo and controversial topics. In this series, we will not be prescribing specific answers to questions such as, can Christians have sex before marriage? Can Christians drink alcohol? Can Christians have a relationship with ancestors? Can Christians get tattoos? And many more. Instead, we will seek to explore these topics and equip you with the necessary tools to contemplate and respond ethically to taboo topics. Your host team for this series, Hloni Rebekah and Ilse.
And welcome to another week of Can Christians. We are so excited and looking forward to this conversation. My name is Rebekah, and today we're going to be looking at, can Christians drink alcohol? I love a glass of sweet rosé, so I am definitely, and actually my favorite drink I would say is Amarula. I absolutely love it. It's such a bizarre drink, but we want to be able to speak about all angles and try and speak into every context. So we have a special guest with us today, but what we'll do quickly is we'll go around, and then when it gets to you, can you just give us a bit of your background, a bit of your story? But yeah, we'll start here and then end with you.
No problem.
Hey everyone, it's great to be with you again. My name is Ilse and I'm part of the Hot Topics team.
Hi everyone, my name is Hloni, part of the Hot Topics team, but today I'll be coming in more from the perspective of a young adult who's had a relationship with alcohol that has changed time and again.
Excellent. Hi, good day everybody. I'm Helga and I happen to be an alcoholic. So I've been sober now for 18 years. It was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. I know people think it's a punishment. For me it wasn't a punishment. At the time it was fun. But then it got out of hand. So thanks to alcohol, I went back to university. I found the church. I have a great life. I look after other people. And my life's good now. You know, I wouldn't change it for the world.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I think there has been so many misconceptions around alcohol. My uncle he's very conservative. He lives in America, and he said to his kids that if you have more than 2 drinks a week, you're an alcoholic. And he put the fear of God in them when it came to alcohol. Now, my one cousin is a bit of a wild child. She actually is graduating summa cum laude from her university, but party animal, adore her. And almost, even though it was put down her throat that alcohol is bad, she still drinks, you know. And I thought maybe before getting on with this, I'd like to maybe look at some of the misconceptions when it comes to alcohol. Certainly in the church, we're going to get a little bit onto John Wesley. For those of you who don't know John Wesley, he is the founder of the Methodist Church, and he was an Anglican, and Anglicans are quite more chilled around alcohol, but we'll get into that later. But Helga, I think maybe from your experience, what are some of the misconceptions around alcohol? Like, for example, a friend of mine I saw on Facebook the other day was having friends over, and one of them was an alcoholic, and he was umming and ahhing about whether to have alcohol at the party or not have alcohol there in terms of temptation. Could you maybe speak into some of the stereotypes that you've had to deal with?
For sure. Alcoholism is still out for debate. I think everybody's still having a conversation about what an alcoholic is. But according to the 12-step program, an alcoholic is a person, it's a self-diagnosed problem. So you can't say I'm an alcoholic, you can't say I'm an alcoholic. It's a problem when I decide it's a problem. So in principle, in my opinion, if you drink in an evening and the next morning you wake up and you have a blackout, in other words, memory failures, there's a problem. If you're landing up in jail every Saturday morning, there's a problem. If you're hitting people in the evenings, there's a problem. So it's up to you. It's not categorically this is an alcoholic or this isn't. But generally a person who's trying to stop drinking and they can't. They don't have the willpower, or they keep having another one. So it also means when you have 1 or 2, you can't stop. So number 2 becomes number 3 becomes number 5. Everybody gets brave. No more inhibitions, and before you know it, you're having 33, and then you're waking up in jail the next morning. Yeah. It's a problem. I'm assuming you, ladies and gentlemen, here you have 1, 2, 3 and go, oh, I'm feeling tipsy. I've had enough. I don't know what that word means. When people do that movement over the glass and says, oh, I've had enough, I don't know what that feels like. So we say, and whoever we is, that about 10% of the people you are an alcoholic or you aren't. There's no reason. It's not because you're bad. Sometimes people say it's a disease that's also open for negotiation, but it means that you didn't want to have it. Nobody wants to be an alcoholic. It's not like your wish when you're 12 years old to please can I be an alcoholic when I get older. Of course not. It's something that happens to you and you're in deep trouble. And why do alcoholics drink? I'm not sure about other people. In theory, alcoholics drink because it makes us feel better. There's generally a problem in our lives. We're unhappy or something's niggling us, and there's nothing like a glass of wine. It makes you feel better. You don't drink because it tastes nice, or we don't. We drink because it has an effect, and we like the effect. Subconscious or not subconscious, it's not always intentional. When you're 13, you're not sure why you're doing that, but suddenly you wake up the next day and you can't remember the evening before. There's a problem. We say you either are or you aren't, and that's, that whole anonymous thing is also for many years it was a problem because it showed weakness and no willpower and you were evil or bad and I can see when some people are drunk, they are evil. People go evil. They have a personality change. So no wonder people say it's evil. I get it, I get it, I understand it. For me, I'm happy to help people, to guide them, and until you want to fix it or you think is a problem, very little anybody else can do about it.
Sure, thank you so much. I think I've gained actually just a better perspective just from you speaking and I also, I have a friend in university, she was sexually assaulted in first year and she started drinking. And it became a coping mechanism for her. And people would just throw around the word, oh, you're such an alcoholic, and it was so willy-nilly, and it almost is, people throw around words, like that we no longer use because they're derogatory. And I think that is one of the words where people just go around saying an alcoholic, you're this, you're that. And so I maybe wanted to get into it. We, as Christians, have a social responsibility to each other. For example, you struggle with alcohol, in maybe a more secular setting, as a joke, I'd be like, oh, one shot of tequila, and all fun and games, but actually, you don't understand the journey of someone else. So that is how we bring it to the church's context. How do we act responsibly as Christians around alcohol, but also how do we understand the Methodist point of view of alcohol, and also how do we grapple with it as people, the three of us who enjoy a glass of wine, who enjoy having something with dinner. So that brings me to my first point, I suppose, is what did John Wesley actually mean? And you actually bring it up about how some alcoholics can't enjoy alcohol in moderation. And that is our perspective of actually what John Wesley was speaking about. We look at scriptures, especially Ephesians 5:18, that says, "Do not get drunk." I'm going to bring it up now. I'm going to read it now. But Ilse, we were speaking about this earlier. Could you speak maybe into John Wesley and then you, Hloni, into his thinking and speaking around it, and then how do we execute it? First of all, as responsible Christians to people who do struggle with addiction, and secondly, just as, young adults.
Yeah, definitely. So I was doing a little bit of research and prep for this, and so I'm someone who's grown up in the Methodist Church, and there's always been this. No one ever sat me down and said the Methodist Church doesn't believe that you should drink. It's never that kind of conversation. But there's this, as you grow up as a Methodist kid, and especially as you become a teenager and a young adult, there's this idea that there is a bit of a grayness, but not gray, about alcohol. There's this idea that as Christians we shouldn't drink, or we should be extremely careful. And so, just reading up a little bit in preparation for this. John Wesley, as a founder of Methodism, wrote a letter to an alcoholic right back in his time very, very long ago. And so my understanding is that he's kind of John Wesley would go and reach out to the people in the margins, and especially alcoholics, was someone that really, those people that really caught his attention. So he writes this letter to the alcoholic, speaking about the effects of alcohol, and then to say, if you, for example, have an alcoholic in your family and it's become normal for you to see alcoholism or the abuse of alcohol, maybe you should rather abstain from it. Others should maybe in moderation. But he also speaks about then not engaging with alcohol in a way that would tempt other people into it. And just, I think just at heart is essentially really being responsible, each person being responsible. Now, whether that really, I'm not sure, whether his teaching was to say everyone should abstain from alcohol, I'm still not quite sure. But the heart of his teaching is definitely that as Christians, we cannot take this lightly, that there is so much, it's not just a question of yes or no to alcohol, that especially around alcoholics, it's something we have to be very careful about. And I think that's also where it came in with the Methodist Church around using grape juice in communion instead of alcohol, because even that little bit at communion might be just enough to send an alcoholic back the whole way that they've worked not to be.
Absolutely, Ilse. I think it speaks also deeply into our theology as a denomination. You know, one thing that the Methodist Church has always been criticized for is being too involved in social issues. You know, you'd hear people saying, why are you guys mixing church and politics? Let's just pray and get over it. You know, and at the heart of our theology is what they coined social holiness. That there is no holiness without social holiness. And so when you look at what alcohol does to communities, then alcohol becomes a concern of the church. We can't just say we're going to be praying for people. You know, if we are concerned about social holiness, it means that we are concerned about stuff that come with the abuse of alcohol. And therefore, how do we then intervene as a church? We become a place that is alcohol-free, so that it is a place that 1 hour, or depending on how long you stay at church on a Sunday, but for that time, you are in a place where you are free from temptation to alcohol. You know, so I think that is something that is very important. You know, it speaks a lot into how we are concerned with what alcohol does in society. But at the very same time, then, this is where I personally then also would say there is this concept that, you know, this growing concept in youth ministry circles where they speak of the family space, the home space, as the place of natural learning. You know, that is where you learn. There's stuff that I pick up from the home space without even having decided to pick up on it. And so when I am taught from the home space about alcohol, it affords me an opportunity to know what my family is vulnerable to because of genes that have been passed down. You know, and so the church is an intervention, but I strongly believe that it is a faith teaching that belongs in the home space, also around alcohol.
Thanks so much, Hloni and Ilse. And this is, I think that the point of moderation versus abuse, or the moderation versus none at all, is something that is important to pick up on, because I think that I do think that there is a problem with alcohol, and specifically with young people. I've definitely had the experience of it, and this is definitely my thinking. I'm 25 or early in my 20s, I could never be an alcoholic. It's only for older people, you know. Yeah. Or it's because I'm a Christian, I could never be an alcoholic, you know. Yeah. And Ephesians, I just want to bring it up quickly. Ephesians 5 verse 18. Sorry, I was diddling on my phone earlier. It's because I couldn't find the verse, but I've got it now. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. And I think lots of people say to me, Rebekah, a lot of my non-Christian friends will say, Rebekah, but Jesus turned water into wine.
Yeah, of course.
Listen, like, we have the suppers, but we have Jesus before he's going to die as the Last Supper with his disciples, there's wine. We have Jesus' first ever miracle being wine. And we're not sure about how much he drank, if he drank, but there's definitely, you could lend yourself towards probably he could have during the Passover have had wine. But just from your experience, maybe specific, because you say during your recovery, you found the church and you found God. What has your relationship been like with being an alcoholic, but then also finding a faith community? How did you find speaking about it in these contexts? Did you find it quite judgmental, quite not?
Not really, thanks for the question, but it's quite interesting you talk about temptation. So I think all of us, when we're young, we know the guy who causes trouble. We know the clown, the guy who drinks too much, and everybody's having drinking competitions, and he's the guy that wins. He's the guy. We all know he is. So he's the problem. And then he's the one that everybody's going to bail him out of jail because he's got into a fight, and everybody thinks it's funny until the next day. Then it's not so funny. So when does the funniness stop? So if the poor guy is trying to stop drinking, let's not have down competitions with him. So let's not tempt him and say, oh, you're a man, you can do it. You're right. That is a bit unkind, and don't push him. After 2 years or 3 years of sobriety, lucky me, I discovered why I was drinking and took the problem away, and therefore took the desire for drinking away. So I'm very comfortable to go with you ladies and gents to the pub. You're welcome to have a nice drink, and I have absolutely no problem. In fact, if you do drink too much, I'll drive you home. Really, it's quite nice, actually. But in the first year or two, be gentle. The guy who's struggling and he's drinking and then he's not drinking, I think you must be kind. I think we must be kind to each other. People usually try and do these drinking competitions. Leave that alone. But generally you'll find in the 12-step program, funny enough, in 1935, they discovered the cure, if that's the right word, for alcoholism. And funny enough, the cure was to find a power greater than yourself. So you can read into between the lines there. What does that mean? So I don't have the power over alcohol. Obviously not. Because I said to my friends, three tonight, not 33, 3. And they would say, but Helga, number 4, you downed it, and then you went to the pub, and you climbed over the thing, and you took the vodka, and we couldn't stop you. And I was like, oh, that's not me. Yeah. So you just don't have the willpower. After number 5, it's gone. So that kind of thing is a problem. So I couldn't control that. So once it was kicking in, nothing can stop me. That's kind of what makes a person alcoholic, is that you just really want more. So it's not because it tastes nice, it's you want more, and it's kicking in, and it's a bit weird. So is it an addiction? I'm not sure, but for me it was solving a problem. So there is a little bit of an underlying problem. I felt very sorry for me. My life was terrible. Poor me, another drink. I found every reason to drink. But finding something spiritual, something bigger than me, certainly is the solution. And I wouldn't stop anybody from finding that. Like, let them find that path. Once you found that path, there's nothing better.
Before we actually started, we were walking up here together, and I watched a movie a few weeks ago called A Million Little Pieces, and basically, we're not short of movies of people who have been alcoholics or drug addicts going to rehab and transforming their lives. But I was speaking a little bit about the glamorization, like how they glamorize addiction. And that kind of goes into our abuse of alcohol versus moderation, and exploring having a healthy boundary with alcohol. And I think you touched on that a little bit about having drinking games. You're going in, there's this whole thing of, if you can down this beer, you're a real man, or like with girls as well, definitely. But could you, or Ilse, when we were walking down, maybe speaking a little bit about the healthy relationship with alcohol, and also understanding that movies, because I've taken a lot of my cues from movies, and these stereotypes that maybe we can get into of you walk into a rehab, you're there for 3 weeks, you walk away and the temptation's gone, and how as a church can we support people while also holding the conviction that we like to go home, have a glass of wine to wind down. How do we act out our social responsibility?
I think what you spoke about, Helga, is sometimes it's not just about the alcohol, it's about a cause. And there's something behind the thing that's actually causing you to engage alcohol. And that's maybe where as a church we should engage it, is instead of just looking at it as don't drink, we need to look at what are the causes that actually cause people to ultimately either become alcoholics or to have a healthy relationship, and how do we negotiate those spaces. And maybe just to draw on a biblical example, there's this book in the Bible called Esther, and Rebekah's laughing already. And so in this, there's King Xerxes, and he has this massive big party, which was customary for that time. And at that party, they have a week long of binge drinking, and at some point he decides it's a good idea to call his wife and says, come and parade in front of all the men. And she refuses, and she gets kicked out as queen. The whole story goes on. But we look at that story and we say the problem was with the queen, it was her fault, but we don't look at the causes of what the toxic culture at that time. I know it's an outdated example, but it was a very toxic culture around drinking, even in the Bible. And maybe that's what we need to do as a church, is deconstruct the drinking culture. Maybe the issue isn't alcohol itself as the liquid, but it's the effects it has after you engage it, and also what is causing us to over drink or to drink so much, or even the unhealthy cultures around exactly drinking, games and those things. When did it become a game to to have so much? And that's maybe from a church perspective. Hloni, maybe you can speak from as a youth pastor of how would you engage this conversation with teenagers? Because we all know as a teenager that someone told you not to do it, you wanted to do it even more, regardless of what their heart was behind telling you. So how would you engage teenagers, especially or young adults, around this issue?
Yeah, look, I like the example that you cite, Ilse. In the scripture that you read, it speaks about wine leads to. It's about what it causes, as opposed to saying alcohol in principle should be demonized. Firstly, knowledge of self, me knowing myself as lehlohonolo means that I need to be aware as a young adult of how much I can take, whether I should drink. You mentioned something very important. You say no one can diagnose another and say you're an alcoholic, but it's actually something that you have to be aware of. So it starts with me, that sense of awareness. Even when you look at, when we speak about lineage, that speaks into sense of awareness. What is it that my family struggles with that we're not allowed to have? I was saying just earlier on in a conversation that there's stuff that I know that my mother told me from the onset, that you cannot have this because we know the results as to what it does to people in your family. And I think there is a lot of, we usually disregard that when it comes to alcohol. Because we don't want to speak about alcohol, and kids are meant to learn about alcohol from their parents, actually. They need to say, okay, dude, this is what we're putting on the table. But by being silent about it, we actually disempowering kids. So I think knowledge of self, knowledge of alcohol in your story, not only your personal story, but your broader story, and then number 3, understanding that the problem is what alcohol leads to. So if I know myself, I will understand what my relationship with alcohol will lead to. And hence, do not consume too much wine because it leads to 1 to 3.
Yeah. I have an extremely addictive personality, and that is something that I've had to be aware of, from whether that is sweets, whether that is alcohol, whether that is food, whether that is a person. I have a very addictive personality. So I think it's also very important, exactly what you're saying, is you understand your tolerance, you understand your boundaries. Helga, do you think that, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to think about how to word this. Do you think possibly that the 3 of us could look at this a little bit naively, like in terms of, alcohol personally, I don't see it as a big evil because I personally haven't struggled with alcoholism. I haven't been directly, someone in my family is an alcoholic, but I wasn't directly affected by it. Do we maybe look at it too simply?
So the quick answer is yes, we do, because as much as you touched your question earlier about glamorizing it was very pertinent, because the statistics basically are 1 in 1,000 people who walk into Alcoholics Anonymous actually get sober. So what's happening to the rest? So the lives that those people are living are terrible. You're not in control of your life. You will lose your job. You'll lose your family. It's not so funny. The 1 in 1,000 that actually gets the acts together and writes the book sounds wonderful. And yes, it is good for them, but not everybody can do that. So why me? I have no idea. Why did I walk into Alcoholics Anonymous and just, oh my God, this is me? Versus the 999 other people went, oh, I'm not sure. I mean, we say an AA meeting, if every single person who walked into AA actually stayed, we would need the Wembley Stadium to have an AA meeting. We don't. At the church, we've got 20 if we're lucky on a Tuesday night. So and we're the end of the road. Rehabs, with the greatest respect, do their very best they can, but you cannot sort this out in 3 weeks. So it's not funny, and the people you take with you, your family, you can come to an Al-Anon meeting here and you can see the families with their big eyes like they've reached the end and they don't know what else to do. It's not funny. Lucky me, I found it, and lucky me, I got the answer. But it's not funny, It's not funny. People never mind car accidents. You were talking about your friend who was sexually abused. Ladies do some very strange things when they've had 10 glasses of wine. They get themselves into deep trouble. We've had a lot of people doing serious damages to other people, shooting, stabbings, and they wake up the next day and have no recollection of what happened. I reckon that jail up the road, 90% is all calls from alcoholism. They get brave, they get stupid, they get whatever it is, your guard gets let down, and somebody gives you a dare, oh, here's a dare, go and do this, and you're too dumb to notice what it was, and before you know it, you're in jail. And that's why the AA meetings in jail are huge. Most of those crimes are alcohol related on some level, and that's what's not so funny. I mean, I'm making it as if it's wonderful, but it's not wonderful. So to encourage family or say, oh, go ahead. You are playing with fire, and fire is a wonderful thing as long as you're not burning people's houses. So it's very useful, but it depends how you use it.
I think you've raised something very important. I'm sitting here thinking to myself, how much does context then have to do with alcohol? I've been a youth pastor in 3 communities. And out of those 3 communities, there is one that I can say stands out. We have seen a lot of young adults abuse drugs and abuse alcohol, have genuine problem around this. And one then begins to wonder, even when you look at basically even communities within South Africa, there are communities that experience more, that have more people who are, even though they might not be aware of it, but have a problem with alcohol. And one even wonders, that, so when it comes to the church, is it really even just to just say alcohol is the problem without engaging some of the socio-economic issues that drive people to actually drink alcohol? Because we are just diagnosing people and leaving them there, and that is where my struggle is, where we need to have a strong balance and say, okay, cool, alcohol is a problem, but there are other issues that sometimes accompany this addiction.
Just quickly, if I don't mind interrupting. So we always in AA say alcohol is our solution. It's not our problem. It's our solution. The question is, what's actually the problem? And that's something that the church can help. Why are people drinking? There's a reason why you're drinking that kind of quantity. It's not because it tastes nice.
Sure, and I think it's so... I'd actually like to pick up on that a little bit more. I actually didn't have that in my notes, but I think it just proves my own naivety to approaching alcohol. Because I think and it's exactly that whole thing of, with the drinking games and stuff. I was actually speaking to my parents. Growing up, alcohol was a big no-no. I've never seen my mom have a single glass of wine. It was just not allowed. I remember the first time I got drunk, it was on Sambuca, which was alcohol. It was given to my parents years before, and actually it had gone off. And I was violently ill. And that's actually how badly my parents just don't have alcohol in the house. But it also proves to me my naivety. I kind of came into this thinking like, oh my goodness, yes, I love a glass of wine. Like, let's get the church to reevaluate what they think. Let's get the church to actually, maybe the Methodist Church specific, to get a little bit more chilled on it. And I think my stance has actually changed a little bit since actually just sitting here with you, because what I've realized is that I cannot speak about an experience that I've never experienced. So I can easily sit up here and go, but Helga, like, your problem's not my problem. You know,
Correct, yeah.
just because you have a problem with alcohol, why should I care about you and your problem?
Yep.
You know, and that definitely, not specifically in those words, was my stance. But I'm finding it a little bit difficult to back myself up, and actually what I've written down before, because speaking about alcohol being the solution and there being so many problems before, yes, we've so quickly gone to demonize alcohol, but actually what have we done to help people with their triggers that triggered alcoholism? You know, so what are the stereotypes that you can speak into perhaps around alcohol and alcoholics? And because I think, like, in my own head, an alcoholic isn't functional. An alcoholic is easy to spot. So for you,
Okay, so you're right. We have a misconception, and maybe it's from TV. I'm giving my age away, but in my day, we watched a TV series called Dallas, and one of the brothers was an alcoholic, and he was stumbling all over the place, and it was terrible. That was all I had, you know. And then, of course, the first time I had a few blackouts, I thought there was something wrong with me, and maybe I had a brain problem. I didn't have an alcohol problem. I had a brain problem. And then, you know, I only drank on a weekend. So also the misconception is that you have to drink every day and you have to have lost your job and your family and stink of alcohol all day. That's not true. I had a very nice business. I did not drink from Monday to Friday. Subconsciously, in hindsight, maybe because I was terrified that I didn't know if I could handle or not. I had a very nice job. There was nothing wrong with me. But when I drank, not always, but it became more and more, it was progressive. So in the beginning, it's once a year that you suddenly have a memory failure. Then it's twice a year. Oopsie. Then it's once a month. Oopsie. And then you realize before you know it, it is basically every weekend. So we call it progressive. Yeah. So, in the beginning you can handle. And then also people start not inviting you to parties because you're a pain. So it's subtle. It's a little bit subtle in the beginning. And then it depends on when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous because I had a memory failure problem, not a drinking problem. I didn't want to give up drinking. I just wanted to learn how to have 3 and go home. I didn't want to give up. Don't be ridiculous. Calm down. It's a bit dramatic. Look, I've got a job and I've got a house and I'm qualified and I've got a big business. So, and also when you walk into AA and you see a lot of famous faces and you're like, oh my goodness, you're like, sheepers, are they alcoholic? And you can't believe it because, of course, we're so embarrassed. Oh, what happens if somebody recognizes me? Well, everybody's in there for the same reason you're in, because we're so self-obsessed that we actually, and that's what happens. So in the beginning, it's a bit weird. So I used to fib a little bit and go out for the first couple of weeks and have lime and soda, vodka lime and soda. Meantime, I was just lime and soda because I didn't know what it was. I couldn't believe I was an alcoholic. What on earth is that? That's a person who's got on the park bench and has lost his life. So there's a lot of misconceptions.
Yeah, and I think that is where we, actually us, just to get to the question of can Christians drink alcohol, because I think maybe that is actually something that we need to walk away with having an understanding of, Ilse, yeah.
I think, so maybe this is more directed at you, Hloni, and then Helga, I'd like you to come back to it, is how do we answer that question without it being, it's either this or that? Because I still, even after, and I'm definitely with Rebekah as well, is my convictions around alcohol are slightly altered in this conversation, but I still don't feel like as a church we can make the decision for someone else. Just like with what you're saying with alcoholics, it's a self-diagnosed thing. It's a decision you have to make to say, I want to walk away from this. And maybe in the same way with our relationship as Christians in the church, it's a decision, it's a personal conviction that each person needs to make about their journey with alcohol, whether they will totally abstain, whether moderation is their way, if that is even possible, or whether they are okay with it just in general. So my question is, as a church, when we're teaching about alcohol, if we are even, I think it's really important that we speak about alcohol in a church. We've spoken a little bit in last conversations saying that there's some of these taboo topics that we engage in different spaces, but we never engage it in the church, and that's where we almost anchor ourselves. And that's, if as Christians, our faith is anchored, or it anchors us. How do we as a church teach about alcohol without it just being, do what I say, not what I do?
Yeah, Ilse, I think it's so important. I think our mistake when it has come to engaging alcohol as a church is that we have neglected it as the sole responsibility of the AA group. So we do not even come in. We don't even engage this. We just send you straight to AA if you have questions around alcohol. Now, the danger of that is that the young person who will be sitting next to Robert
Yeah.
and encouraging Robert to take another drink is not the person who's at AA. And he needs to have some sort of theology around how do we as the church respond to what the church to what alcohol has done to society. That's the first thing. The second thing is it would be very easy for me as a youth pastor right now to sit and say it is the sole responsibility of the family space. But the dangerous thing with that is that alcohol disrupts the family space.
Yeah.
And therefore, those who need teachings around alcohol the most do not have a place. And the church is meant to intervene. The church is meant to come in. The church is meant to go into the margins. And so I think what the church needs to find a position where, one, we need not to teach about alcohol firstly in isolation. We need to engage about alcohol, but highlight it as something that's in a society that with many other situations. For instance, I would say you cannot go on and go on into a township and speak about alcohol without engaging the issues that are faced by black men on a daily society. I mean, on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Sheesh. On a daily basis. You can't. You can't go into a colored community, engage about alcohol without engaging about the issues around identity. There are critical issues around identity that we need to engage in as a community, where in how we define identity, we've kind of said coloreds don't belong.
Yeah.
All of that. You can't go into a white community and engage about the issues around alcohol without engaging to what military conscription did to the white male. And I'm making it sound like it's just a male problem, but it's not. I'm just highlighting examples. So we also need to engage those issues while we engage alcohol as a church. But also, then we need to charge our congregation members and teach them what it means to drink responsibly in a community where there are people who might be addicted to alcohol.
Yeah.
What it means to have a responsible relationship with alcohol. So that is where I stand, that the church needs to intervene, but the church needs to also further equip people who are standing alongside others who might be struggling with alcohol. And the church needs to stop just saying, hey, it's your responsibility, that's it. We're not going to speak about it, it's a Tuesday issue. I think that's unfair.
And I also think that something that you've highlighted, and then Helga, I'd love for you to close up on anything that you have to add. I think that not speaking about alcohol actually hinders people who are possibly alcoholics from coming forward, especially in the church. So we can sit here and speak about how we have a glass of wine and we enjoy this and we enjoy that and kind of open it up. But the truth is that if we sit with an old, actually younger people as well, but if we take a specifically older generation and we sit down with them and say, we enjoy a glass of wine, and then they turn around and say, oh, well, that's not okay, Jesus wouldn't have drunk. And then let's say 10 years down the line, I'm having 1 drink, then 3 drinks, then 5 drinks, then 7 drinks. And then it turns out that it became this taboo issue, this elephant in the room where I actually felt like I couldn't come forward and speak about it. So just I think also just with Hloni, if we look into societies, it's exactly what you have said. Alcohol is the solution. There are other problems, and I think specifically in the colored community in Cape Town, how when men went to go work, they were paid in alcohol. So actually it becomes this generational issue where it was, but my uncle, but my father, but my grandfather, and you go and you diagnose them alcoholics. We walk in, missionaries, people walk in without an understanding of the context and go, you guys are alcoholics. And they're going, okay, we are, but that doesn't help change the fact that my grandfather, my father, my uncles were all, that's how they were paid. That's how they made their living, So how do we speak about it better? How do we engage this conversation better? And I think that will be our closing remarks.
So you're right. So in context, to stand in judgment, I think, is unkind. I don't think any of us really understand it. Even the doctors, they're still talking about it. Is there a gene in your system? Is it genetic? Yes, if it's a link in your family, it's probable that you've got a gene that's susceptible to we don't really know. So to stand in judgment and to doom somebody and say he's got no willpower or he's weak or he's evil is unfair. I think you're right, open up the conversation, talk to the communities, tell them if they suspect to be a problem, here's the doors, let's try and talk to you, let's help you. And then find out if there are issues, it's very sad. We know it happens by the second of the month. All the money's been spent at the taverns and the kids don't have shoes on and they don't have food. And you look at and these guys come to us and the social workers want to kill them. And I get it, and people say, their family, they won't feed their own kids, but they at the tavern, they drink all their salaries. I mean, there's something wrong. This is not just something we need to talk about it. Why are they doing that? What is the underlying problem? Why does he want to forget? Alcohol makes you forget. So what is it that you want to forget? So there's lots more to play. Why are people drinking? What are you getting away from? Why do you need to feel better? What's wrong with reality? Is something terrible with reality that you need to get away from it? It is an escape thing. So what are you escaping from? So it is it's a much more complicated thing than just the liquid, as you say. The liquid's cute and it gives you, like a little bit of a head rush and you feel all nice and fuzzy. But there's something else going on. So to open up conversations, to talk to churches and to the communities and just to keep the dialogue going, I think is paramount. And also just to have the AAs and even these rehabs, they do lovely work, just to carry on doing it and find out why people are troubled, and if they can find something spiritual instead of, lucky for them.
I think if there's one thing that I've learned from this conversation tonight, maybe as we wrap up, is that it's not just simple. It's not just a simple conversation about alcohol. Can Christians drink alcohol? Yeah, sure they can. Should Christians drink alcohol? No, it's not that easy to answer the question. There is a lot more involved. And when we engage this, I love how you speak about it's all these things together. It's almost like it's a system that comes together to help those that are struggling with alcohol, to set up the next generation for engaging alcohol responsibly, and that this conversation is something that needs to be had both in the family space and in the church space. So maybe just as we wrap up, if anyone has got any last thoughts around this, otherwise we'll just wrap up for tonight.
Look, from my side, I think the church needs to engage alcohol. There needs to be some sort of a congregational approach to alcohol. Paul speaks of it very beautifully when he says the body has many parts, and when the one part is actually struggling, the other's also struggling with it. So if there's an alcoholic in a congregation, if there's someone that is struggling with alcohol in a congregation, it means that the whole body is actually struggling with alcohol.
Yeah.
It's our problem.
Yep.
And so we need to learn to respond in such a way that, because again, I repeat, by saying it's a Tuesday problem only, we saying you are on your own. But once we start engaging it within the context of the congregation, it becomes our problem, and at the very same time, we then need to, there's places where, there's people who have a normal, I don't want to say normal, but there are people who have a healthy relationship with alcohol.
Sure.
And that needs to be commended. And at times, we need to stop doing that behind the curtain, because we are denying other young kids who are going to have alcohol one day, or who might be curious about alcohol, the opportunity to witness someone with a responsible relationship with alcohol.
Yeah.
The only time we ever get to see about alcohol is when we speak about it in a bad light.
That's true.
And yeah.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Helga. Thank you so much for being here. I just really appreciate your insights, and I know that we definitely appreciate your insight. And it almost became less of a conversation of can Christians drink, but more of a conversation of how do we encourage the conversation around alcohol, where it's I may not have an issue with alcohol now. I'm not going to say I'm only 25, so who knows? Maybe now I have a hold on it, but actually in 10, 15 years' time, maybe I don't have a hold on it, And I think, as Ilse said, the one thing that I've learned is that it can't be a Tuesday issue. And as much as I can have a healthy relationship with alcohol, I have a social responsibility as a Christian to educate myself on the relationships that maybe aren't so healthy around alcohol and not be judgmental towards it, and be more understanding that it isn't exactly what you said. No one wakes up wanting to be an alcoholic. No one's 12 years old and going, you know what, I dream of being an alcoholic. And people joke with me and say I have an issue with mercy, which I do agree with sometimes. But I think that being exposed to AA and being exposed to the fact that there are things happening in the church that you may not be aware of, like the AA meetings and stuff like that, begins a dialogue that maybe was never there before.
Yep.
So thank you so much for opening this dialogue. Thank you for being extremely vulnerable and also allowing our naivety to be at play here and actually being patient with us.
Sure.
We really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, so we have our hot topics, Bible study, well, not really Bible study anymore, but discussion group that happens on Tuesday nights on Zoom at 8 o'clock, where we're going to be continuing this conversation. We would just love it if you would join us then. Helga, thank you so much for being with us. See you all next week. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.